Welcome back to episode 4 of Break It Down. In this series, we will take a scenario and we'll do an attempt to break it down, and then I will share with you my thoughts on how I look at it and tackle the problem. So let's get going. Before we begin, here's a quick disclaimer. The scenario presented are not real and not based on any actual teams. Any similarity to the real world events or teams are coincidental. The scenario presented are adapted and edited for the purpose of learning and simulation for this video only. Alright, so what do we have for episode 4? Let's take a look. So Team A has front-end developers, back-end developers, testers, an architect, and a designer. Although everyone has their own specialization, they are willing to learn from each other and take on other tasks as well. The only person not joining this cross-functional approach is the designer. The designer is usually alone, making designs for future backlog items. The design helps customers better understand upcoming functionality. However, customer thinks that what was shown is the complete product. Sometimes the designs created are for work that gets removed from the backlog. So let's do a quick analysis of what we have in front of us. So really quickly, I think what I do like is that this is a team that has all the skills necessary to complete work for software development, right? Uh, it seems like everybody is cross-functional except for the designer. And the work that the designer produces probably is a high fidelity in such a point that the customer gets confused and think that it is a real completed product. The last thing that is on here is that some of the work that the designers work on are further ahead. So by the time that it gets to the point where when teams are working on them, the work is deemed no longer needed. So it's a wasted work. So what kind of questions would I ask? One, what is stopping the designer from taking on other tasks? Why does the customer think that the work has been completed? How is the design being presented to the customer? Why is the designer taking on future work? How far ahead? How is the story written? Are they vertical or horizontal slides? Is the designer's work UX or UI? Or both? Now, in this scenario, the problems that I see, I think what jumps out are two things. One is the flow of work. We have a designer that is working further ahead, right? So because this design is working ahead, there's a potential of work that is getting wasted. So by the time that we get down to the point where, hey, we're ready for our team to work on, the work may no longer be needed. So this is a case of going too far ahead. And that's why some of the questions I asked before was, hey, how far ahead are we? Okay. The other thing is that what else can this designer help out with? Can they help the team to enable work? The other problem that we have is there is a customer perception that the work that the designer showed to them are completed work. I think that's an easier fix. The last one that comes to mind is maybe the story are not sliced correctly. Maybe the stories need to be in a better condition. So again, those are three of the problems that kind of jump up at me. So how do we solve the problem that we have? So in terms of flow of work, I think there's a couple ways of doing this. Now, I've seen this myself as well, where designers will be working one sprint ahead. So how far ahead? I think that's a try, inspect, and adapt more than anything else to find the sweet spot. Maybe one is right, maybe two, maybe not more than that. Okay, possibly also that in this instance the designer is running out of work, right? If you think about it, they're only focusing on their work that they do. They're not helping somebody else. Then they may not have enough work. So what do? So in this instance, the designer may then look at what's on the backlog and try to pull things ahead so they can get this person's work done. Now, this is great, but it also potentially creates waste in this instance. So if you have that, then maybe look into, well, one, could the designer do some of the work and help the team? Two, can we share the designer with another team? Maybe not. Or potentially in the situation I've seen also where there's a team of designers where work flow into their team and they completed the work. Now that could be some dependencies in play right there. So again, it's all a matter of trying out and see what works for you. I think ideally what I like to see is, I would say, Designers may be working a sprint ahead, but not too far ahead. Possibly take on other tasks and help out, maybe doing testing, for example, and stay as close as they can to the team's progress. When it comes to customer perception, I think that's a fairly easy fix. One is communication, is ensuring that, hey, by the way, I'm showing you work here. This is incomplete work, right? Simply put a big draft on your, on your design might help just to show that it's not in a completed product. I think I've seen also teams where they actually created things where they can click on. It looks like an actual application. Again, we gotta be very honest with the customer and show them, hey, by the way, I'm showing these things. I'm here to gather some information. This is not in any way completed. This brings us to the point in terms of there is I think a book called Sense and Response, which I put on the screen right here by Jeff Gotthoff and Josh Sadin. Hopefully I pronounced the name correctly. And in this book, they talk about how we can stay ahead of it in terms of, doing a really quick, low fidelity kind of prototyping, mostly throwaway. Show that to the customer first to make sure that that's the direction we want to go. And then the work they do is pretty much throw away, right? So then you can do that. If the customer is not happy, then you don't proceed with it. The only thing that I kind of not sit well with is the fact that it sounds really much like a old waterfall ways, where you do all this work up front, you design up front, and then only proceed. The only difference here is that we're doing small chunk of work. We're not trying to do all the designs and then moving forward. I think that's the only difference that I see based on what they're recommending. The last thing is what I talk about is story slicing. Is the story sliced in the correct way? So potentially, again, we're looking at things like maybe doing, story mapping exercises, maybe doing, customer journey mapping from that standpoint to allow us to create the right direction. One thing to note is that what a designer do in an organization may be different from the next organization. There is this aspect of UX and UI. What does a designer do in this team? Are they purely focusing on UI? In that instance, do they need to be? Can the developer take on those work, right? Does the designer design the UI and then pass it on? Or do they just create standards, right? And allow the developers to build upon the standards. In terms of UX, I think I like to see designers more on the UX side, understanding the user experience, giving guidance in terms of that. So I would say wireframing is something very close to the designer. They can quickly do, I would say, low fidelity, not something high fidelity, something low fidelity, so we can understand and solve the problem that needs to be solved instead of creating, a perfect rendering of the application that may seem to be wasted. So there you have it, a quick breakdown of the scenarios in terms of what I see and how I think about it. I'm curious to what you think and your solution might be, or your experience with a designer on your team. How do you guys handle that?